Number two, where did life come from? Where did life come from? You see, I was privileged to quote repeatedly in this book a man named John Lennox. John Lennox is an Oxford mathematician. He was a student of C.S. Lewis at Cambridge. It's fascinating to hear the stories of C.S. Lewis teaching at Cambridge. John Lennox, who's from Northern Ireland, said that Lewis would come in the door talking. His class would be there. He said he would be undressing while he'd start his lecture undressing. And by the time he got his coat and his hat and everything off, he was already in full stride. And then he said as he concluded the lecture, he started dressing, kept talking, and did this. And as he walked out the door, he said goodbye. And he said people were standing room only to hear C.S. Lewis at Cambridge. But Dr. Lennox, and I had lunch with him about 2 weeks ago, handed him the book, thanked him for what he's meant, because he has debated Dawkins. He debated Richard Dawkins, who wrote The God Delusion. The Wall Street Journal called it a revelation. It really was the upset of the century. In fact, one of my friends who has been in Dawkins' home said that many times Dawkins on the way to debates doesn't even care about his opponent. He calls them fleas. And on the way to this debate with John Lennox, somebody on his staff said, hey, you better read this book he wrote. He looks at the book, and here he is. He's from Oxford. This guy, John Lennox, is from Oxford. And as he's going through the book, he looks up, and Dawkins goes, this is no flea. Wow. And John Lennox looked at him in this debate, the God Delusion debate. He said, Richard, because Richard Dawkins is a biologist. And Dawkins says this. He says, yes, life looks designed. He calls it the illusion of design. He said biology is the study of living things that appeared to be designed for a purpose. He said, but don't be fooled. This is the central theme of Dawkins' God Delusion book. He said, if you say the life was designed, he said, you're left with the question, who designed the designer? Now, Daniel Came of Oxford, who is an atheist. Daniel Came, I wasn't going to do this, but I got to just find this for just a minute. We'll edit out the awkward pause. Dr. Daniel Came of Oxford, this is on page 100, who is an atheist as well, responded sharply to Dawkins on the central tenets of his book. He says, this is an atheist teaching in Oxford now. He said, Dawkins maintains that we're not justified in inferring a designer as the best explanation of the appearance of design in the universe, because then a new problem surfaces: who designed the designer? This argument is as old as the hills, and as any reasonably competent first-year undergraduate could point out, is patently invalid. For an explanation to be successful, we do not need an explanation of the explanation. See, Dawkins says, oh yeah, it looks designed, but if you say God, an intelligent designer designed it named God, and you can't explain God, then you can't use that as an explanation. And this atheist at Oxford professor said, that's stupid. One might as well say that evolution by natural selection explains nothing, because it does nothing to explain why there were living organisms on Earth in the first place, or that the Big Bang fails to explain the cosmic background radiation, because the Big Bang is itself unexplainable. I put it this way: if you're walking through the woods and you find a turtle on a fence post, you may not know who put it there, but you would be rational in concluding that time and chance did not put it there. Somebody put that turtle on the fence post. You don't have to have an explanation for an explanation. Now, what John Lennox would say is this, because everybody wants to die on the battlefield of evolution. Now remember, evolution is true in the small and not proven in the large. Look around this room, you see the enormous variety of people. Same within all the animal species. Yet, one species turning into another, that's where the fossil record and the evidence is very, very sparse. Which led men like Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard to say, well, that's because we call it punctuated equilibrium. And this is what he said, that a species evolves up to a certain point and then jumps to the next species. Well, that's what I believe. I believe that there's massive variety, genetic variety, whether it be to environment or just genetics itself. And yet, People have always been people. Dogs have always been dogs, etc. Now, here's what Lennox says, though. He says, Richard, evolution only explains what happens after you get life. Evolution can't explain where the original molecule came from. Charles Darwin, and it's quoted here, said, as of yet, we have no insight into where the original molecule came from. So you've got to get life. If you don't have life, you have nothing to naturally select. Now, that may have seemed a little vague. Charles Darwin, back in his day, would have imagined the cell was like a blob of goo. He had no idea of the intricate complexity of a cell, like a sophisticated engine. Francis Crick in the 1950s discovered DNA. Francis Collins opened the book of DNA and taught us how to read it. And here's what basically they found. That the ordered sequence of information in DNA was so fantastic. Let me put it to you this way. If you ever got a pocket text, hand me my phone there, Dean. Just for a dramatic, there we go. Good chance to check my, okay. If you got a pocket text is where you could tell somebody sat on their phone and it's just absurd, not irrational, but just doesn't mean anything, not intelligible. If somebody texted you, don't tell anybody I cheated on the test, now they may have accidentally sent it to you, but they didn't accidentally construct it by just sitting on their phone. What if you got a pocket text 3.1 billion letters long? That's the ordered sequenced information in the human genome. And that's why we say life is no accident.